Hello, warriors. We are going to do something a little different today. We're going to kind of look at some questions that are important if you're a new wheelchair user or if you are an intermediate. Some of these questions might pop up for you. For people who are just rude or people who are just don't get it. But anyway, and we all know some of those people in our lives. Anyway, I'm going to use some questions from New Motion, and this was written by Karen Roy. She is the New Motion brand ambassador. So I want to thank Karen for writing out these questions. We're going to do them in a video style so that if you have difficulty, reading, you can listen to the questions and think about them. We're going to reflect about some of these questions, and I'm going to give some short answers. I've been in a wheelchair for over 2 years. Karen's been in a wheelchair for 31 years, so unfortunately she was the victim of, I think she was shot. So unfortunately she was a victim of a robbery. So in 1987. So thank you, Karen, anyway, for writing these questions, and we'll put them out there in YouTube form so that people can kind of think about them and ask questions or put their comments about them. So some of these questions are going to be a little rude, but some people do throw out these questions to you while using a wheelchair. So the first one is, are you just sitting in that wheelchair or do you really need it? So that is a very rude question that I'm not sure I would even answer that one. But Karen is putting a possible answer here. I was shot in a robbery 31 years ago. So you can answer this question or not because, it is just rude, inappropriate. So, yeah, I'm not even sure I would answer that one, and let's listen to this question again. Are you just sitting in that wheelchair or do you really need it? That's a question you shouldn't ask anyone to begin with. So only if if somebody is joking or this person really well, you might be able to joke back and forth, but this is a question I wouldn't even ask anyone. What's wrong with you? And that's a really popular one. What's wrong with you? And I'm telling you right now, you don't have to ask that. You don't have to answer that question. What's wrong with you is a private situation. That is your personal issue. I don't go around on the streets yelling at the top of my lungs, what's wrong with me? I just don't. That's my private situation. It is my medical information that I don't have to repeat to anyone. So what is wrong with you? You can start by saying, I'm sorry, but that's private. Karen's answer, if you are referring to the wheelchair, I am paralyzed, or I am, I have MS, or I have this, or I have that. But again, you don't have to answer that question. If you are in a deeper relationship, I would say, your boyfriend or whatever, and, this question comes up in a deeper type conversation, you might feel open to answering it, but if it feels wrong to you, then it is a wrong question. You don't have to answer that. Karen put down an answer. If you are, if you are referring to the wheelchair, I am paralyzed, and you can tell your story a little bit, but a stranger to come by and say, what's wrong with you? And the next one is even worse. When will you be able to walk again? It is none of their business. Now, sometimes you might have family members who are not knowledgeable of your wheelchair situation, have not been with you to the doctor, Here you are in a pizza gathering and they're coming up with these questions. I would just say, I'm not up to answering those questions. They're kind of private. And then you can switch the conversation or go talk to somebody else. Because you're going to have those people who are just rude, who are just, you know, they're rude and they don't know what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. So you're going to have people like that out in the community. You're going to have people like that in your family. So you got to kind of be ready in terms of what's private. Now, while you're in the wheelchair, if you're going to walk again, that's all private. And you have to decide whether you cross that boundary or not. But if you don't want to cross that boundary, you don't have to at all. So the next one, where can I buy a wheelchair like that? Now, I've had this question asked to me out in the community. I just had it recently when I went to Walgreens. And I just, didn't go into much detail. I just said the important place to start is with your primary care doctor. Now, I've been in rehab for a long time, and so I have a doctor and I have a rehab person, and she just went ahead and said, we need to go to something more substantial in terms of wheelchairs. Let's talk about it. But that's the place to talk about wheelchairs, with your doctor or with your physical therapist. That's the place where those questions are appropriate. So, where can I buy a wheelchair like that? And there you go. That's not too bad of a question. I just said you could start with your primary care doctor. So, because you don't know if it's for the person or a family member. Sometimes it's for a family member. So, can paralyzed people get pregnant? That's another private question. And you have to decide if you feel comfortable answering it. But usually the answer is yes, of course they can. And then what happens in the bedroom is not their business. But yes, if somebody comes up with that question, yes, they can't get pregnant, whether it's artificial insemination or whether it's the act itself. So, and then move on because that's a little personal too. Um, how did you give birth? And it's up to the moms to see if they feel like answering it, normal birth or by cesarean or whatever happened there, and if you feel it's like a little bit too personal, then you say, I feel that's too personal. So, you have to decide what feels right because we're talking about boundaries here. And it might be another mother, who's curious or is fearful of when she is due. So that would be an appropriate question. But you have to feel it, in terms of this, is this an appropriate question or not? Your partner must be a fantastic person. Now, why that question? I think they think the best of the other partner, like you don't exist in the relationship, that you have no voice here. And it's really important for them to know or just say, we're both great. We both collaborate and whatever needs to be done. But sometimes those comments and questions can come up and they're kind of rude. Your partner must be a fantastic person. So Karen answered here, I would only marry a fantastic person. That is so true. I hope you don't mean he is fantastic because he married a woman in a wheelchair, or he really never saw me as disabled. You can fight back. But, in any relationship, both have to be fantastic and both have to fit in the relationship. So just one person can't be fantastic because if you only have one person who's fantastic in the relationship, it's not going to work. So the person in the wheelchair has to be fantastic and your partner has to be fantastic. It just has to be that way for the relationship to work in any circumstance. I don't care if they're in a wheelchair or not. You both have to be fantastic for the situation to work. And I hope you're hearing me on that. So don't feel put down or, that they're great and you're not, or that, the idea they get is that the other partner is just doing everything. That's the picture they have in their head. And that's not true. That's not true. But because they don't understand a paralysis or they don't understand the life of a person with a disability, I don't care what the disability is, whether it's blindness or whether it's using a wheelchair or, sorry, I just have a leg problem here. Um, I don't care what the disability is, you know, there has to be healthy parameters and healthy exchange in the relationship for both to be fantastic. It can't be just one. So I'm hoping that these questions, and they're on the root side because you're going to get those kind of questions. And they're going to say to you, I hope you don't find offense, but what happened to you? And it's like, well, that's private. You don't have to answer to these questions. You set the boundaries. You set the boundaries on how you answer or not answer at all. You might not feel comfortable. Like, how did you become blind? Well, I was born blind. How did you lose your legs? That could be diabetes. That could be in a war. That could be due to circulation issues, but you don't have to answer. So I want to make that clear so that you feel comfortable hearing those questions and knowing that people are going to ask crazy things, and that's okay. But you have to establish your boundary in terms of, no, that sounds rude, or I don't feel comfortable talking about it, especially with strangers. The strangers are going to pop up everywhere. If it's a family member, in your family who's a jerk and who's not. And when you have a deeper relationship with that family member, let's say it's a cousin you've been hanging out forever and ever, then, those questions might have a different meaning, when they ask it. But, it might not sound rude or weird when they ask it because you've been in a relationship. You've gone to Disney World, you've been to school together, you have, hung out like brother and sister or sister and brother for a long time. So these questions might not sound rude. So it just depends on who asks it and where and why. So all these questions can sound rude, but if it just depends on who's asking the question. So you have to think about that. You have to think about your boundaries, and you have to think in the environment in which the question came out. Was it at Walgreens? Was it at home? Was it during a pizza gathering? Was it at Christmas? Were you just really sharing a deep conversation with that person that you've known all your life, and this question just came out? And for you, there's not much of a harsh boundary there, and you feel fine answering the question. But if it's weird, if it's in a weird place, and it just doesn't feel right, then put the boundary there and just say, no, I'm not going to answer this. I don't know who this person is. And they just went from good morning to a very personal position, and it just can't happen. So, and that's important to know. You have the right to privacy. You have the right to just say, I don't feel comfortable answering that question. But thank you for asking. Be polite as you can, but also using that boundary, in terms of when, where, and with who. When, where, and with who. So I want you to think about that in terms of boundaries that you have with people who are going to be rude and are going to ask you weird things. So let's think about this. And also, you can put in other questions that you've been asked out there, either with family or strangers or friends. And you can put in the box, what you answered or how you answered. And see how that sounds to others, because we do need those tools to be able to work it out and have sometimes we have to have a line already prepared. How would you answer these questions? What do you feel is appropriate for you? To sometimes, it's not just how do I not tick this person off? And that could be the opening phrase. How do I respond without ticking them off? And if they get angry at me and start yelling at me, well, then I need to go get some help. Just don't continue the conversation. Just seek out some help from the pharmacist or from the manager, and just say, there's an issue with this person. They started with a very personal question that I didn't want to answer. Now they're yelling. So there's a problem there, and it's not about you. It's about the other person. And that's also important to remember. It's more about that. Those kind of questions are more about them than it is about you. So anyway, keep on thinking about those questions and how you would answer being out there in the world and your wheelchair situation, which is private and nobody needs to know except your other half or a family member. So just know that you are entitled to privacy in all circumstances.